All right, so at this point, I have gone in on balance on many different fronts. And this was one that I found particularly interesting because this concept I'm about to talk to you about has to do with the balance and the polarities of the spirit itself. Okay, so within the Enneagram, if you've all heard of the Enneagram, um, essentially the Enneagram was one of the original concepts of like mapping the stars and mapping the placements of an individual's path and the specific archetypes. I've talked about before how the numbers were not originally like a system of counting, but they were more representative of a specific archetype that corresponded to a certain planet. So within the Enneagram, you have 1 through 9. And each one of these numbers corresponds to a certain power, a certain archetype. And all of them, except for 4 and 7, correspond to a planetary body. Whereas 4 and 7, this is interesting because 4 and 7 are often considered in like esoteric traditions as the hidden ones, like the hidden two. 4 and 7 are representative of two forces called Rahu and Ketu. Okay, now Rahu and Ketu are known as the north and south nodes of the moon. So they are the polarities, whereas the moon itself is representative of the number 2. So within the number 2, we have duality, but we also have balance. Okay, so this is talking about how within the 2, within the moon, we have Rahu and Ketu, and we have the north and the south node. This is important to note because the moon, as many people don't understand that the moon is actually not a feminine. A lot of people associate the moon with like a feminine energy and they associate the sun with like a masculine energy. Neither, they're both androgynous. So the moon itself is the mind. And the mind itself has these two poles of duality, which are Rahu and Ketu. Rahu and Ketu can also be, they're also symbolized as a serpent. But Rahu is the head of the serpent without the body. Ketu is the body of the serpent without the head. So within that, you have these two poles, these two opposite ends of the spectrum, one of them doing one thing, one of them doing another thing. And within that, within all of what I've talked about when it comes to balance, we know that to bring the poles together is where the power truly is. It's when we polarize, it's when we say, I'm this side and I'm not that side, that we actually divide from ourself because all is ourself. And we need to recognize that these forces that oppose each other are often just two sides of the spectrum, that when we bring them together, we get a certain power, a certain energy that could not be attained had that thing remained polarized, had it remained on one side. So when we polarize, like I said, we separate the powers. And this is like when you have two magnets and you break them apart and you try to push them together and they don't want to go together. If you identify with one of these magnets, you say, I'm this one. Now I don't like that one. Every time I go towards it, I feel this resistance and it just, I don't like that side. That's not me. That's not who I am, right? This is a dualistic frame of mind that is keeping us from recognizing the true power that we have, which is essentially to be alchemists, to be the one who you're neither of them. This is more of having I suppose, a trinary viewpoint, where as opposed to left and right, you're like the pyramid, right? You're the polarity, not even the polarity, I guess that'd be more like the neutral, but you're looking down on the two polarities and you're saying, instead of I'm this one or I'm that one, I could bring these forces together and create this. I could bring the fire and the water together and I could create steam and I could power this engine, right? I could create some sort of combustive force from bringing these two forces together, from bringing these two opposites together and creating some sort of reaction within the two. So within the spirit, as I've talked about, we have the elements within our body, within the physical nature of things, but these are the polarities of the spirit, because the spirit has both the Rahu aspect, which is more attributed to like fire, ambition, going out into the world, success, material gains, which is a power in itself. Absolutely. You get more non spiritually minded people that are far in this polarity, that are like, I'm all after it, living my best life, I'm taking care of all this stuff, which that is a power in itself. Absolutely. Then you get the opposite side of it, which is Ketu, which is like to know the self without stimulation at all. This would be like the watery aspect, like the deep water, the womb, if you will, where it's like you're so deep in this space that it's like, imagine like a baby in its mother's womb, where it's like everything is like you're in this safe, quiet space. You might hear some like murmuring from the outside world, but like you're not involved directly in the stimulation. You're not going after anything. You just are. You're still. There's nothing to it. And this is the interesting thing about this more spiritual polarity, is that when people tap into this, because Rahu or Ketu is also representative of like wisdom. It is this wisdom, because if we talk about the serpent's tail and the serpent's head, it is the wisdom that is the path that we've already gone along. And the way the serpent's tail pushes the head along the path, it is the wisdom that has sort of been like the path we've already taken, the path that has already been trodden. And therefore, based on this wisdom, we're seeking new from Rahu, from the head. But it's within this wisdom that oftentimes spiritual people, they discover this. They're just like, no, like I'm that one. And they are like, yeah, I'm going to be this one, right? Like I'm the still one. And the funny thing is that that's still a state of division, because you're still neglecting this other polarity of yourself and not recognizing that the power here is to bring the forces together. So the point is to not go too far into either of them. A lot of spiritual people, they reject the like more Rahu energy. They're like, I don't have the material stuff. Nah, I don't want any of that. A lot of the people that are more in the Rahu energy, they don't want to do the still thing. They don't want to sit with it. They don't want to be in that deep water, in that deep space, in that deep wisdom. They're not ready for that yet. So for those of you that are, and those of you that see this, obviously if you're watching this, you probably are ready for this. It's to recognize that you are the alchemist. You are not either of these forces. You are the one that works through them. As I said, these are the polarities of the moon, and the moon is the mind, and the mind is the tool, it is the vessel, it is the vehicle of the spirit. Now, to balance out these forces is where we find the energy, and to recognize where we get unbalanced in these forces is to recognize where we could essentially have a smoother existence. Because the point being, especially if we're getting into higher realms and we're getting into higher projections of ourselves, balance is about recognizing there's a waveform, but keeping that waveform balanced. We don't want to have these crazy transients, these crazy spikes, and now I'm way over here, now I'm way over here. Because as I've talked about in other videos, you could get burned out, or you could feel super lethargic and not want to do anything. And we could just recognize this when it happens and know that, okay, now I'm a little too far up. Okay, I'm gonna go back down. A little too far down, I'm gonna go back up. And kind of base ourselves on that center baseline, give ourselves that point of stability where we're not like going way far into this direction and then crashing, and way far into this direction and then sinking. This is the extremes of it, because Rahu, like I said, it is this energy of ambition, going after it, making stuff happen, going and having those experiences. But this can become unbalanced when the mind can be essentially like taking you into all this crazy stuff. Now you're dwelling on this idea and you're obsessed with material gain and all of these ideas of like, oh, I need to have this. If I don't have this, oh my gosh, blah, 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 blah. This is Rahu getting unbalanced. This is the fire getting out of control. Now with Ketu, you have the opposite thing, where it could be like, I'm so far in the womb, like, oh, there's nothing. You don't care. You don't care about anything. You become so nihilistic. You've become so uninterested in the world. You start taking actions that are like kind of crazy and kind of out there just because you're not really grounded in reality. You just don't care. You're still with it. You're with it. You're with the wisdom, right? The wisdom, the echo, the ripple in the water. So within that, we have to recognize where we need to be leaning into each of these specific polarities. Because just like I talked about with the elements on the physical level, this is the spiritual level where we have these two polarities. And this is what's interesting about the Enneagram and how these polarities work. Because within the Enneagram, each of us has a specific number associated with our Enneagram based on the date of our birth. And this was how the ancients would actually determine, they're like, okay, this is where you came in from, based on how you came in from. In other words, if this is the prism that is you, and you have a specific light shining into this prism, where is the light angled from? And if we know what the prism is like, which is the Enneagram, and we can determine where the angle at which the light is shining into the prism, we can determine a certain kind, with a certain accuracy, like what your path is going to be like, what your life is going to be like, and what planetary bodies are going to be governing you in a sense. So like I said, there are 9 of them. Rahu and Ketu are not overtly symbolized by planets, other than the fact that they are the polarities of the moon. If you were to symbolize them by planets, Rahu would be more like Neptune and Uranus. Ketu would be more Pluto, based on the behaviors of these specific archetypes. But otherwise, you have the 9, and each one of these corresponds to a specific planet. And each one of these specific planets corresponds to a certain day of the week, a certain number, of course, certain characteristics, a certain pathway that, like I said, can be measured with a certain degree of accuracy, like what sort of archetype you're playing. But the point here was not to be like, I'm this one and I'm none of these other ones. The point here was to recognize, like, you're still the light shining into this prism, but the light is still all of it. You're not supposed to be like opposed to any of these sides. The goal was to harmonize all of them, to bring them all into a balance, to bring them all into a universe. This is kind of an interesting thought I had recently about people call like the chakras and things like that, which are wheels within our body, right? And you're gonna have to correct me if I'm wrong, but these like biblically accurate angels, which are, I think they're called ophanims, I think, but they're the thing where it's like it's got the eye in the center and then the wings, and then it's got these concentric rings all going around it in like a specific way. These specific rings and the way that they go around, I attribute to like how the chakras are in the body. Of course, we're on a dualistic plane where we have like the left and the right, and the chakras are going straight up. But I believe that on a higher plane, how this actually looks is something like that, where it's like you have these concentric rings, and if they're in balance, you have these rings going around you, and like they're within each other, right? You have like the ring, and then the bigger ring, and then the bigger ring, and then the bigger ring, and they're all sort of going within each other, and you are in the center of it. This would be like this is the same thing that the planets are doing, right? And when we talk about the Enneagram and the different planets, this is the same way these all correspond, because you are the one that is in the center. You are the being that's in the center of these, and your goal is to bring them into harmony. But within these, we have, like I said, the only ones in the Enneagram that are representative of poles, like pure polarities, are Rahu and Ketu, which is the north and south nodes. The only other ones that would be like close to this would be probably like 9 and 6, right? Because the 9 and the 6, they're upside down of each other, but that's Mars and Venus. But they're not necessarily like opposites of each other, because they're representative of different bodies that maybe polarized in some way, but it's not like a direct polarization the way Rahu and Ketu is. It's not the head of the snake and the tail of the snake. It's not these two components that are being separated and that are representative of and doing different things, even though all of the planets are doing different things. So without getting too deep into this, I want you all to recognize that despite whatever you might be, if you want to look up the Enneagram and how that actually corresponds to you, it can be interesting if you're into that sort of thing. It's essentially like you take the day of your birth, like disregard the month, disregard the year, and you take like whatever day of the month that it is, and you take the sum of those two numbers. If you take the sum of those two numbers, essentially you get a specific number, and that specific number corresponds to a specific archetype of the Enneagram. And that can give you some interesting insights about yourself. But to recognize that within 4 and 7, which is also part of us, like I said, all of the numbers are also you. You might have one direction that you came into this, but you're still all of them. You still have aspects within yourself that are this planet and this planet and this planet, because it is all within us, my friends. So recognize these polarities, recognize that we have Rahu and Ketu, we have the fiery go get it sort of energy, and we also have the like, I'm not experiencing anything, I'm with myself, and knowing when to implement them. Because you are the observer of them, you are the alchemist, you are the one that is utilizing these forces and these frequencies to actually bring your vessel into balance, and then become like the alleged ophanim, where it's like, it's this thing and it's got the eye in the center, and then these wheels are rotating around it in a balance, in a perfection, in a balance. You can be like that too. And I believe that the point of us being here is to begin to master these elements, to actually take these elements and utilize them so that we can bring a greater balance, harmony, joy, fulfillment into our life, and not be creating spikes in the spectrum. We don't polarize as much. It's a balanced waveform, and we go throughout life in that balanced waveform. We're not making too heavy of splashes over here. We're not making too light of splashes over here. We're doing just right. We're finding that sweet spot, so to speak, and only you know where that is. All right? So with that, my friends, be well, be whole, and take care. We'll talk soon.